It usually just takes a couple seconds to queue up. Close my other junk here. Please exit the 95 programs you have running.
I was actually going to talk about that.
Do it. Yeah.
I will.
Good. If you have anything, you'll see the StreamYard interface. If you have anything you want to post, if you post it in comments, it will end up in the YouTube comments. So that'll be helpful.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah. I'm going to post the link to all 4 articles just as one hit when we're done with the dev news real quick. So I have that. And then I'll have your baby JVM link at the end. Let me grab that a while. We're going to get started. People who are coming up on the stream, we're just going to get started in about 2 minutes with the TechChat Tuesday. With our special guest, try again, with our special guest, Dan Boykis of Chariot, who is right next to me on my virtual right.
Hello, everyone. And you're on my virtual left.
There we go. Unlike Zoom, where you're not sure, where you're not sure what your Hollywood square is for everybody else. Yeah. All right.
Then you have people like above and below you.
Yeah, you do this thing.
Yeah.
I think I got your link here too. All right, I think we start. 1 second, and then we're good to go. As I say, I think we start. I hit paste, and nothing happened. There we go. All right.
Now we're live.
We are live. Now we're live. Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Rimple, and this is TechChat Tuesday for Tuesday, October 6th, 2020. And I'm here today with Dan Boykis. Say hi, Dan.
Hello, everyone.
And Dan and I work for Chariot. Obviously, a couple things as we get started with our Tech Chat Tuesday today. Want to point you to a few things that are happening out there. The main thing is that we have an event coming up at Chariot. It's a Java at 25 event. Let me bring that up on the screen so people can see this. All right. So Java at 25, retrospective and futures. And this is a thing we're doing on October 21st, 2020. It's going to be from 3:15 to 5 p.m. with a happy hour afterwards. It's going to start with a discussion between myself and Aaron Mulder, our CTO, and we're going to talk about our journey with Java over the years at Chariot. You know, one of the first things we did was Java, a lot of Java-based applications early on, and it's been with us, whether it's Java itself or on the JVM various languages such as Groovy or Scala or Clojure or what have you. And, you know, back-end applications, mobile apps. So we're going to talk about that, talk about some of the things we've done that worked and maybe some things that were dead ends that we've learned about, we moved on from. And we'll do that first as the first opening act. And then the second part of it, we have a special guest, Brian Getz, who is the Java language architect at Oracle. He's spoken at Philly Emerging Tech multiple times, both as a keynote and as a regular speaker. He's just a great guy to have out and talk about where Java is. So we'll talk about the JDK, where it's headed, what's going on with the different VMs, and various ways it's being enhanced, both at a language level and architecture level. And then after that, we're going to start a Zoom happy hour. I think we're currently looking at a tool called Gather for that, but stay tuned. Once you register, we'll give you information. The other cool thing is we have a little deal with La Colombe, or La Colombe, if I can say it right, for coffee and Workhorse Brewing for a vanilla coffee porter, and we'll send discount codes to the attendees 2 weeks out. So you can order your coffee or your coffee beer and enjoy it while you're on the happy hour with us. And that's what's coming up. Also at Chariot, if you head over to our resources blog, you'll see a lot of things being published these days. I know we had Matt Gilbride on recently for the AWS CDK for a talk he's given And he was learning about, the costs associated with running things like ZoneMinder in an EC2 instance and how to optimize his EC2 instances. He has an updated blog article there. We also have another one from him. He was on a roll there. So he was looking at Vue 3.0. We have some blog entries by Tracy Wilson Rossman on consumer habits, and an interview with Tiffany Wilson, who's the new president and CEO of the Science Center. So if you head over to our blog, you see a lot of good information. All of our tech chats will be on the screencasts section. And so you'll see that. You'll see a talk that I recently gave about AWS Code Build, and a bunch of other stuff. So head over to our resources page, check those things out. And of course, the tech chats are available there as well on the podcast section. And we have them all, and you can subscribe to them as well. There's the RSS and iTunes links. In addition to that, if you head over to YouTube /Chariot Solutions, you'll see we have a ton of content out there as well. So, for example, we just did a talk. We're doing this talk right now, but Dan had a talk on his Chariot Day talk, which we're going to talk about during the middle of this podcast. And so that's there. There's a whole bunch of other podcasts there, the TechChat Tuesdays. If you go to playlist, you'll see playlists for those, for 15 Minutes With, which are interviews with our people and various people in the open source business leaders in the community and tech leaders. You'll see all of our Philadelphia ETE, Philly Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise talks from 2020 are all online. So you can see all of the different things that our speakers had talked about right there, as well as other various years and other conferences, such as our IoT on AWS conference and single page app conferences. So that's that. Secondly, let's get started with some developer news. Let me turn off the screen here. And yeah, it's cool little tool, but you got to get better at switching, and I'm not there yet. All right, so let's talk about some things that are happening out there in the developer community and the dev news, at least. All right, so the first thing is, let me find my notes. NVIDIA has announced a. Why is this goofing off on me? Hold on one second, everybody. Professionalism falls apart when most needed. Here we go. Let me bring this up. So NVIDIA has created a embedded systems board, kind of like an Arduino, but it's using the NVIDIA GPUs. And I'm just going to bring this up here. It's the Jetson Nano 2 Gigabyte developer kit. Now, this has been around for a while in various forms. There's a 4 gigabyte version, for example, and there was an earlier rev of this. But they're trying to bring this down to prices that can be affordable for the hobbyist for AI or robotics. So, Dan, this is a 128 core ARM processor using NVIDIA's cores. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, I understand now why they bought ARM.
Yeah, right? They can lower those prices and they can embed the stuff without licensing. Yeah.
So I think this is sort of a big deal.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this type of development is not easily accessible unless you have like credits on, a cloud provider that has a crazy GPU that you can use.
Right.
Or unless you shell out a bunch of money for your own.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, like, for instance, I think a lot of people, most people that just have laptops, you pretty much either have to start shelling out a bunch of money for a desktop PC that you built yourself with these specs, or use it, get some credits for a cloud provider and start using their GPU to train something. This actually, I think, is very reasonable for somebody to buy and play with.
$59, interesting.
Yeah,
and that's great, what it brings
yeah, like if you go to, any cloud provider with a decent GPU, you'll burn through that in a matter of weeks.
In like no time. Yeah,
Easy.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. We thought this was a cool little announcement. And so that's one. We also have another interesting update, Python 3.9. So let me bring that up. And Python 3.9 has a couple of cool new features in it. One of which is time zones, right, Dan?
Yeah, that's a big deal for people that work with time zones. So I'm kind of like of two minds about it. Like one is, why did it take so long? But two is, well, if it took so long and Python's still super popular and people solve these problems, like maybe it wasn't that necessary. But it seems like, time zones is something that like all serious languages should just support out of the box. And as I say that, like Java, which is like the ultimate, serious language,
Yeah.
didn't support it really well until Java 8. So, but that's very nice that time zones are support. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people deleting a lot of not necessary code.
And it looks like a lot of other interesting things in here too. Like, so for example, enhancements to updating dictionaries and
type hints.
type hints. That's a cool thing, right?
Yes.
Because they're types, but they're dynamic. But it'd be nice to be able to hint that and say this is supposed to be a number, for example. So a lot of cool features. Check that out. I'll put the link for these things in a minute up on the chat here. Another cool thing, we are getting a faster RAM structure. So DDR4 is the current fastest RAM you can get. I know a lot of laptops, I think, if I'm right, laptops are still doing DDR3 for power management mostly. Desktops usually have DDR4. But DDR5 is coming, and so the first 64 gig modules are out. So you'll see this first in servers. But these are going to be really, really fast. I think it's double the bandwidth of what you have now. This is on Anantech. And so you can see some of the specs here are kind of crazy. They think that they're going to be able to double the memory speed, and also they're bringing the voltage down to 1.1 volts. So hopefully that means that this is something you can put in a laptop ultimately with lower power consumption.
Yeah, this is pretty exciting. Kind of makes me want to build a desktop again.
Right? Yeah, it's funny. Like, I have, for a while I bought a Surface Book that I've been using, and then my wife had to start working from home, and I'm like, well, the cool machine goes to her. But it had a nice GPU 1060 in it for a desktop. It's minor, but for a laptop, that was nice. So I could do some stuff if I really had the inclination in GPU programming and such, but, and things like that. But in terms of having nice, fast, low power RAM, that would be nice, because that was always still limited to 16 gigs, which I think is still very, very small for a programmer for a desktop these days. So,
yeah.
You
got a couple Docker containers, a VM or two, and
you're done. Yeah.
Slack. Couple of Electron apps.
Yeah, any Electron apps, right? Any of them. Gets crazy. All right, next we have, I'm going to let you take this one over. So this was from Joel.net. How One Guy Ruined Hacktoberfest 2020. What happened, Dan?
Yeah, so the short story is that DigitalOcean, which is a very popular, I guess they're what, cloud provider, I guess you could call them. They have a good intentioned event called Hacktoberfest, where if you contribute to an open source project with a pull request, they give you a t-shirt, which is great. Except with a lot of good intentions, sometimes there's drawbacks and things don't work quite as you expect. So there's people that started gaming the system. One YouTube personality with a lot of followers, and we're not going to name him, basically started demonstrating how you can do a bunch of low quality pull requests where, like, you just like have a new line here or some dashes there, right, in the README or something like that.
This is amazing in a README. Yeah.
Yes, just stuff that like wastes a maintainer's time. Like they're not even necessarily even spelling fixes. They're just, I formatted something a little bit here. Here's a pull request.
Mm-hmm.
And so you spam 10 of these to a bunch of open source projects and you get a t-shirt. So unfortunately, so that created a lot of drama because a lot of open source projects, like maintainers aren't, they're already doing this, based on, they're just out of the goodness of their heart, right?
Yeah.
And they're not getting paid for this. And now, they're already getting hit with pull requests and bug triage and all sorts of things that they're not getting paid for. And now they're getting a bunch of low quality pull requests.
They're getting spam and PRs,
yes.
Which is painful at best. So that's a shame. It reminds me, like, I've been dealing with our website, and, everyone's at one point had a WordPress site, and the first thing you get is a ton of comment spam. So you get rid of the
Yeah.
commenting system, and you're like, you find another commenting tool that doesn't have the spam in it, and you're plugging these holes, and you get post submission spam, and like it never ends, you know. And that's all we need now is for GitHub, for example, to get polluted with lots of stupid spam. That's a shame. So hopefully there can be some way of, I don't know if there's like a verification process or something, but it's kind of like a bug built into the system. You want to have people be able to do a PR. You want to have spam checking on the PR submit. I don't know.
But
Maybe
see,
not a
the
bad idea.
further issue is like it's not even spam, right? Like a lot of these people probably don't realize, like they're normal people, right? That's not some business trying to,
Right.
send out millions of emails or something like that. Like these are just people that are trying to get a t-shirt and maybe don't realize that, well, not maybe, they definitely don't realize that doing these type of low quality PRs are, they're affecting maintainers downstream.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, when they do this stuff, they don't think about like how these maintainers, like how they come to be. You
Right.
just kind of think of it as a given, and that these are not hobbyists that are putting a lot of their free time in the evenings, like when the kids are, put to bed or something like that. Right.
Yeah, it's one of those
And wasting
scratching an
your
itch
time.
kind of things. Yeah, like they found something that was really useful to them, and they probably turned it into something for other people to enjoy and use, and now they're getting bugged with this.
Yeah, and I feel a little bit bad because some of these people I don't think they're realizing that, um, like the people that are doing the PRs, I don't think they're realizing that they're hurting the maintainers downstream, probably for their favorite open source project that they actually like using, right?
Right, right.
So I think that there needs to be a lot more education around this type of stuff. And potentially, I mean, maybe GitHub could think about doing some sort of reputation-based system, but then again, I don't know. You'd start filtering out new users. It's a difficult problem.
I mean, it's
I'm
not
sure
like you could
exactly what to do.
AI. You can't like AI scan it for things. As people modify their comments all the time and readmes and things
Right.
like that, fix line feed formats. So it's like that kind of thing would be a regular PR sometimes just to clean up something.
Yeah. So
So
it's a hard problem. And I guess all these things happen, with scale, right? Like, so
yep,
before you had GitHub, like there was SourceForge, like there was no PRs, right?
right.
Like it was very difficult to get involved, right? With GitHub, it's seamless, which is good. We want that, but at the same time, sometimes it's a little too seamless.
Yeah, too easy to get involved. Yeah. All right, cool. So interesting dev news. Let me drop these all in the comments here real quick, and we'll move on. So let's talk a little bit now about your talk that you did recently. So we have this internal conference, Chariot Day, that we've been running for years. Dan and his colleague Anatoly Polinsky have been our stewards of that conference and running it. And at some point, we want to have both of them on to talk about the fact that they do that. And they also do Philly Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise, too. They help curate that conference, which is a huge job
And there's a
every
lot of
year.
people involved in that,
Yeah.
including you, Ken.
Yes, that's true. But I mean, you guys are kind of like leading the organization of everything, and also all of us participating on those different committees. So we'll put you guys on for that because I want to talk about that in depth another time. But the main thing is, we're all stuck here. In general, even before that, I mean, you as a consultant and all of us as consultants have to mentor people in new technologies on a regular basis, right? So
Absolutely.
how has that changed for you now that you've been, not working from the office, at the moment? Like,
So
how
just
do
to
you
give
mentor new people or mentor people in new technologies?
Yeah, so just to give people that are watching a little context, so shared consultants generally are expected to um, mentor people on projects, right? So we're generally we're senior, right? We've been there before. We generally like to think we know what we're doing, right? And our customers kind of realize that, and so we do quite a bit of mentoring on the project. Just work with other people, right? There's more junior developers, right? You want to bring them up to speed, et cetera, right? So the issue is that once the world changed in March, at least for all of us here. Well, how do you keep that going with now that everybody is remote, right? So there's a couple ways, and I think some of the things I told the more junior people on my team that they maybe haven't heard anywhere else, is one, you need to over communicate, right? Like, so now, before you could have like a water cooler conversation, right? Or somebody would just be walking by and ask you, oh, how's that going? And you tell them, and that's fine. Like all those little serendipitous situations, they're all gone now. So it's very important to over communicate and not to get frustrated by having to repeat yourself many, many times. And that's just the nature of, I think, remote work, that over communication is key. Two, because of over communication, you're also, the other part of it is now you're more of a written culture, right? Like before you could just talk to people and hash something out. Now, while that's still great, like you could do that over, Zoom or a phone call or something like that. You can't just bring other people into the meeting as easily anymore. So it's important to write things down so that somebody else actually has a trail to follow of, what happened. So there's a lot more writing going on now for our teams. I'm personally doing a lot more writing, and I feel like, it's incumbent on me to do that as, the senior person on the team, and to get junior people to write a lot more. And that's a big shift because a lot of people, including senior people, right, they don't necessarily like to do a bunch of documentation, right? But this isn't even documentation sometimes. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, here's the rationale of like how we got to a decision. Like this isn't even documenting, a concrete thing like, oh, this is a class, this is, have some comments, or this is a PR request. This is like, okay, well, this is what we were thinking, and these are the kind of trade-offs that we made before we made the decision.
Context and reasoning around it, so people can have an idea for why they're using something, or what's the rationale.
Yeah, so I think the job changed quite a bit because this over communication bit has become like much more emphasized. When you're all co-located, or mostly co-located, it's not quite as big of a deal. The other thing, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but you should have like a separation of, your work and life. And that's hard. That's not always easy to achieve because you feel like, oh, well, you're always connected. So, it's 9 o'clock, and I got a ping on Slack, why don't I go take a look into it? Just real quick. 5 minutes. How long?
Nothing's real quick, is it?
Exactly. There's nothing real quick about that.
Nope.
It could be 10:30 and you're still looking into it from that little innocent ping you got at 9. Right. So it's very important to have a partition between your work life and your personal life. Something else that I personally do a lot more is I screen share with people, because before I could just pair with them. Like I'd come over, like I didn't need my laptop. I'd just come over and say like, okay, well, what are you doing? Show me, blah, blah, blah. And we'd hash it out. Now I find that I do a lot more Zoom calls, like direct, that doesn't necessarily have to be Zoom. It could be whatever.
Or Slack or whatever.
Yeah, well, whatever.
If you have it.
Video. Yeah. And so you do a lot more of those, and you then, show your monitor, you share your screen, right? And the other quick note about sharing your screen, like make sure you close all the other stuff when you're presenting your screen, because it's very distracting a lot of times when like some people have like Outlook going, right? Like it's always dropping down from the top. You got a message, or you got a Slack, or you got a pop up here and pop up there. I mean, worst case, there could be something really embarrassing, but like general average case, it's just super distracting.
Yeah.
Because like the person that you're trying to show something, they don't need to see all that.
Right. Exactly.
Superfluous stuff going on. So yeah, close all your stuff, right? And then show the screen, show only the stuff that is actually relevant, right? So I share a lot more of my screen to kind of have people see what I'm doing, and then have them show their screen so I could see what they're doing. And sometimes you can spot mistakes right away when you do that. And sometimes that's much more productive than like having an elaborate conversation, over chat, trying to describe stuff, and that's very lossy.
Hey, so quick question for you all quick question for you while you're going down that road. So do you find that now you're memorializing things more in wikis again? Because I know that before that was wildly popular like 10 years ago, and then it kind of slowly trailed off to the point where it was a necessary evil. But I think now it's even more important to have something like that. So is that where you're putting things? Are you putting things in like Google Docs, or like how do you end up sharing information more?
So I still have a big dislike of like a lot of wikis, because a lot of times they just turn into like a write-only situation where
Yep.
Your code so my rationale, and again, the different organizations work differently. Maybe some places are more organized with it. But in my experience, a lot of the times the wiki would just be like a thing on the side, and then like some people try to search it and hopefully find something, and a lot of times it's be out of date. So I prefer to have documentation in like, so my client currently uses GitHub. So I prefer to have documentation there. So
like in Markdown docs or whatever in a project. Yeah.
Markdown docs. Yeah. GitHub also supports like ASCII doc and other stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, Markdown is what we use. So a lot of Markdown docs. And that way, you know, you could do pull requests. Like it's all the same flow. There's just more of it now.
Right.
So most of it is still in GitHub.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And if you feel like it works better for the current situation that I'm in, like maybe, you know, somebody else has a better wiki culture. It's just, in my experience, the wiki culture has always been like, yeah, let's write it down and then try to find something in the wiki and never find it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it depends on the organization. Sometimes there are ones that are better, like strong users of Confluence or something like that. But I think you have a good point, which is if you put the docs in there in the GitHub projects, they're also versioned. So you can see over time how they evolve too. So you can see who worked on them and what the changes were, you know, so you get a feel for what's going on in the project. So that's
and I just feel like for developers, it's pretty natural. Like you're already writing Markdown.
Yeah,
I mean, they're highly likely that you know Markdown. Right.
And it renders nicely in GitHub, you know, so you're done at that point.
Yeah, so there's less friction that way.
Yeah, I agree.
The other thing I would say, like going back to like separation of stuff. So I find what works for me, and I've tried to recommend this to everybody. And I don't know if you're doing this, Ken, but I'm going to recommend it to you right now if you're not. If you're using Firefox, right, there's multi-tab multi-account tab containers. Very good. I highly recommend you check that out if you're not right now.
So different tabs having, like you could say, I have a container of these tabs on this particular account and my personal ones on another one.
Right. So I have like work tabs. I have like, for instance, so I think initially they're designed to like protect your privacy. I think that was the original rationale. So like if you're on social media, right, like you have certain tabs and like the cookies aren't shared between those. So whatever is in this tab only gets to see. It's kind of quarantined, and using the word quarantine, but it's kind of quarantined in that group, right? Like it doesn't see other stuff, right? So I have work tabs and I have like my tabs, right? And work tabs and my tabs don't intersect, right? So that way, when I'm done, you could say like, okay, we'll hide this whole group of tabs, and then they're hidden and they're gone, right? So yes,
that thing right there.
That's exactly it. And I highly recommend people check this out. So I have the same thing, like I have a social media tab, right? I have a banking tab, I have a work tab, and I have a personal tab.
Great idea.
And it's really nice to organize.
Helps you organize your life when you're working.
Yeah. Great. So I recommended everybody on the team and everybody I meet nowadays to give this a shot. It's very nice. And the cool thing is that like once you're done with like work or whatever task, shopping, whatever it is, you could just click and say hide them, and they're gone.
And I assume you bookmark the whole thing too.
Yeah, you can then bring them back and move them to a separate window.
Nice.
Which is also nice. So it's a really nice workflow. I recommend everybody check it out.
Yep, I just posted that plugin out there, or that add-on to the notes here.
Right. Awesome. And it goes without saying that like you should probably have a stable routine too when you're working from home.
Yep.
Right. Like don't start working at weird hours. Like try to keep it the same, like 9 to 5 or whatever you were doing. Like try to keep that pretty much as close to how it was back in the day as possible.
Yeah. I find that the difficulty for me is my kids are older now. So you've got like the high school and middle school kids with their computers and their issues. And you're like, I just want you to go over here and do something without me.
Yeah, Not every
interrupt me.
problem can be solved with like, yeah, that's,
Yeah,
I feel like that's just
we're all in that. Yeah, to some
yeah.
degree. Yeah, yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
So like
So
if somebody was to run behind me right now, right, like I'm sure the viewers wouldn't understand, right? Like
yeah,
it's,
because everyone's going through that. Yeah.
yeah.
All right, cool. So let's talk about the other reason we brought you on. So you had a talk for this Chariot Day internal conference called the Baby JVM. And so first of all, the talk, if I could summarize it, is you took the bytecode of a Java class file and you parsed it with Python
Yeah.
to actually review what's going on. So, A, what led you into doing this particular talk, and B, like let's just talk about the guts of it a little bit first, and then we'll go a little further. But let's start with what your motivation was for it.
Motivation is honestly like the first motivation was just to have some fun.
Yeah.
Like I said, like it's not. I feel like as a Java pro, and speaking of the 25-year anniversary, right? Like a lot of us at the Chariot have very deep Java experience,
Yeah.
and JVM experience. But like as a pro, you pretty rarely, day to day, you're likely not going to encounter, this type of like you won't need this type of deep knowledge. So most of it was just for fun. The upside is, right, like once you know stuff a little deeper, it's easier to work with it. You have more confidence once you know how the layers on the bottom work, and you're working on the top layers. You're kind of more confident in your top layers because you understand what's going on a level below, right? It's kind of the same thing with like teachers, right? Like if you're teaching math, it's good to know like a level or two above where your students are at.
Right.
So you kind of it's the same type of thing.
Sure.
Right? Like whenever you work with something, it's the deeper your understanding, the better the outcome will be. And you might not use it all the time, but or won't even know when to apply it. But like one of those situations I think in life is like you're like, oh, when will I ever use this? And if you don't know about it, you never will, right? You'll never identify a moment where you're like, oh, I know this, I can use it here. Right. Like if you don't know something, you'll never have that, oh yeah, I can apply that right here. I learned. So it's one of those situations. But mostly it's just for fun. Just to see how stuff works and understand things a little better. So that was the motivation behind learning a little bit more about it. And part of it is also like I read a bunch of stuff about it before, right? And technical specs and stuff like that, but I never actually like sat down and really got into the guts of it, which I thought was also pretty educational.
So the talk was basically parsing the class file.
Yeah.
And so the class files have a pretty well-defined, well, they have to because every JVM has to operate on them. They have a very strongly defined structure, right?
Yes.
And some of the things haven't changed in years. For example, like what is it? Cafe Babe.
The magic
hex signature, the magic signature.
The magic the magic 2 bytes in the beginning.
Yep.
Every class file. Yes. So also, not only have they not changed class files, I've learned a cool trick. So whenever you're looking at a class file it's not really a trick, but it's observation, I guess, that I've learned. It's not my observation. I found it online. So every class file that you inspect, you should inspect, like if you use Java P, right, which is like the go-to way of inspecting class files. No matter what class file you have, you should always use the latest JDK's Java P because they're all backwards compatible, but Java P's get better every release.
Really?
Yes. So you should always use, no matter how old the class file is, you should always use the latest possible Java P to inspect that class file. And you'll get, all the goodness that they've added since into that Java P. So it will help. So it's a neat trick. So not only have they not changed, because the JVM has been so stable and they don't break backwards compatibility, especially at that level. You can use the latest Java P and get all the nice features of that latest Java P that will show you that you wouldn't get if you were using an older Java P.
Right.
So basically what I did was I took apart a class file by hand. Well, by hand meaning, you know,
By Python
started
handlers.
reading in the bytes and like parsing them and making sense of them. So basically, sort of re-implementing Java P from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, Java P shows you stuff, it's kind of magical. It's like, okay, well, where does this live? So I basically went from like a hex dump of the file to parsing it with a language that's not Java, it's a Python, and taking a look into it and like see how stuff is organized and following the spec. And I think it was pretty educational. I think everybody that's like really interested in Java should give that a shot. I think there's a lot of things that like I read about that became a lot more concrete when you're actually at the keyboard, typing and parsing stuff. So
Right.
like, oh, okay, so that's what the constant pool looks like, right? Like stuff like that. It's like, okay, I've been reading about it, now I see it. It's a little more concrete in my mind now than it used to be.
Right. And as you said, like baby JVM is kind of a play on it, but it's not really that you're building a real JVM. But that's basically the thing that they all have to do is
Yeah.
scan class files and put together their parse tree of everything. And if they were going to go so far as to run the bytecode to actually pull in the operations, the operands and everything and execute them. So, but there are other languages, right? There are other versions of the JVM written in other base languages, right?
Yeah, I think that's what people, at least new people to Java, don't really realize is that there's a lot of JVMs.
Yep.
And the JVM format, like there's JVMs written in JavaScript. There's JVMs written in all
Ruby.
sorts of languages. Like
Yep.
OpenJDK is C++, right? But like there's other JVMs and alternate implementations. I'm pretty sure there's JVMs in Java. Right. So there's all sorts of like basically every language. I'm pretty sure there's JVM implementations in Go. I don't think they're like prod ready, but like people have given it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all sorts of JVMs in all sorts of different languages, and you can do it too. I mean, obviously, you probably don't want to spend enough time to have a production ready JVM that requires probably like a man's century or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's too big of a task. But like as a learning project, yeah, you can do it. You can look at the spec and you can parse a class file. You could figure out like where the bytecode is, and you can execute the bytecode.
I think about those tasks of Hercules, like the crazy things people do. And you look at, there was even a Windows 95. Did you see this recently? There was a Windows 95 implementation. Like they ran the actual Windows 95 binaries in JavaScript in a browser. Probably just as slow too, it's not loaded up. The ta-da, really slow.
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right. All about shoulda, not coulda. And then people in Minecraft doing CPUs and stuff. But the point being that you're right. It's good practice. It's a good way of thinking about how these things are structured and really learning more about them. And I do think like for an internal conference, especially, this is one of those things that you don't have to worry about being camera perfect in everything you do. You just want to learn and share your learning. I think that's so important. I think it's one of the things I love that Chariot does is that we care about our people sharing things with each other, and really kind of making sure that people know that it's great to learn new things because we end up doing new business in different technologies, not because we get a sales call in it most of the time. It's because we know it because we've been paying attention to it. And then all of a sudden we can actually say, oh, well, 3 or 4 of our people have been researching this for this long. And, we wouldn't have done JavaScript. We wouldn't have done mobile unless we did those kind of things or any of the other techs that we've worked on. The Clojure, for example, you guys brought that to us.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of our stuff is driven just by wanting to learn about it.
Yeah,
and then that kind of drives everything else. And I think that's actually a good thing. Yeah, so Clojure is another one of those things where we're looking into it, and now we have Clojure work.
Yeah.
Like I'm on a Clojure project, right? And
how long have you been on the Clojure project? 5 years, 6 years, more than that, right?
A long time, yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah,
so
we've had a few.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so over those years, like I'm throwing a random softball at you, but like being someone who did a lot of Java before and also did a lot of Python. I think you learned Python. I think you said in the talk that was one of your first languages you learned.
That was
But
a long time ago. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, you've worked with a lot of Java, and then you ended up in Clojure. Like, what are your favorite things about Clojure that you would say to someone who's interested in a different language?
Uh, okay,
I
let me
know it's
think.
a complete throw curve at you, but
There are a few things that I
hmm
really like. One is that, and maybe this is number one. I don't know. Let's put it this way. These are not in order.
right,
These are just like cool things.
right,
REPL-driven development is really, really different, especially like in the Lisp, like Clojure, than other languages I've ever worked with.
hmm
So like there's languages that have like REPLs like Python and etc. like
Ruby and
JavaScript. Yeah,
IRB and
yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah,
It's not quite the same. So there's Clojure's REPL-driven experience is very, very different. Um, I don't know how to describe it to a person that hasn't seen it. I mean, there's screencasts on YouTube, so
yeah,
if anybody wants to see an example, they should like just go to YouTube and go to YouTube and search for Clojure REPL coding demo or something like that, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. But your whole program is kind of alive, right? And you play with it and incrementally figure out what it's supposed to do, and then do it, and then save the result. So it's basically you have a editor that's integrated with your code, that's integrated with a live, your program running live,
yeah.
and you get to play with it and incrementally change it as at runtime, and that's pretty incredible. I haven't really experienced it with any other languages. Actually, it's not any non-Lisp languages.
Right,
Um,
right.
the other thing is it's a functional immutable by default, I should say,
hmm
programming language. So functional programming, right? That I feel that's pretty well known in the industry at this point. But the Clojure is one of those languages that lets you do that, and it's part of being a functional programming language, right? Like the data structures are immutable, which is also it's a very different way. Well, sort of different. I don't want to say very different, but it's a kind of different way of working with the language and solving problems. Like the reason I say kind of different is because once you learn some of the patterns, you're like, all right, well, this is how I do it in Java, right? But like mutating an object, this is how I do it in Clojure, and it
Right.
actually ends up looking sort of similar, but it is very different.
And to be clear for everybody who's watching this, if you haven't seen Clojure, it's a JVM language. So one of the benefits of the JVM is because of this open source spec of the language internals and everything, and how the class files are structured and operations are structured with the bytecode. You can write languages on top of the Java virtual machine, and Clojure is one of those languages. Now, Clojure also can run on .NET and other things as well, but the main
JavaScript.
use JavaScript, yeah, right, CLJ, right,
Yes,
Clojure JavaScript.
CLJS, yeah, but everything runs in JavaScript, so people shouldn't be surprised.
Right, right. But I mean, the main focus is that if you got a lot of Java, you've got great interop there because you can do just like you can with Scala and other languages, but you have good interop with the Java classes you might have as well in a project.
Yeah, and this is why I didn't want to really rate them, because that's definitely like if that wasn't there,
Yeah,
like I don't usually think about that day to day, but if that wasn't there, it'd be very hard to do anything practical, right?
right.
Because Java just has such a plethora of libraries for everything.
Yeah,
Databases, like, and all these things are basically proven, right? Like if you want to use, I don't know, you want to connect to Oracle, you want to connect to Postgres, you want to connect to whatever,
yeah,
there's probably a Java driver. It's probably got a lot of users, so that thing is solid, or at
yeah.
least as solid as anything else that could be, right? Because
Sure, sure.
so stuff like that, right? Like you want to connect to Kafka, you want to connect to RabbitMQ, you want to et cetera, et cetera. It's all there. You need a client of some sort. You need HTTP, right? It's all there. And it's all easy to call from Clojure. So
hmm
from a practical standpoint, and from a deployment standpoint too, like okay, it's just a jar.
Right, right.
Like operations knows what to do with the jar.
And then, So in the Clojure community, there is a database that people have been using called Datomic, right? But you've been researching, as we talked about before the show, you've been researching a newer database that came out, open source database, right? So first, tell us a little bit about what Datomic is, and then tell us a little bit about this new open source database.
Right. So Datomic is a brainchild of Rich Hickey,
Mm-hmm.
who is the founder of Clojure, the inventor, I guess. And the thing with Datomic is it's basically like an ACID database, right? But it's distributed into different parts, right? You have, he kind of pulled apart, a regular database, right? And you've got storage, you've got a transactor, et cetera, et cetera. And it's got really nice features that are not easily duplicated in other databases, which is that you have history, right? So like everything you write is kind of like an immutable snapshot in time. And so you can go back in time and you can query like, well, what was the state of the database 10 minutes ago, right? So part of the problem that I run into a lot with SQL databases or with other databases is something went wrong, right? And you've been asked to fix it. And the only time dimension that you really have in most environments are log files.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the only thing that like you can look back and say like, well, what happened? And if those log files aren't quite up to snuff, or for whatever reason, some information wasn't logged, you're kind of in trouble. You're like, all right, well, there's an entity that was updated. I don't know what it was like before. Or something got deleted, right? Like, I don't know what it was like before. That's it. You're kind of stuck. A lot of times you're left making inferences, right? You're like, well, I can't tell you 100%, but I think this and this happened. And usually, if you have enough experience with the system, you can kind of guess accurately enough at it and you'll be right. Sometimes you won't be, and sometimes you just don't know. If you're new, good luck, right? So Datomic kind of solves that problem, right? You can say like, all right, well, what was the state of this system 2 days ago? Let's look. Oh, and then this happened. So that type of stuff, those type of problems that could take hours or days to try to debug become trivial to debug, right? And like we don't have space issues anymore, right? Like you can have, terabytes upon terabytes of data, right? So like there's no reason to update in place a lot of times, or at least not as a default, right? So like you want to, accrete data and not really just like smash it in place. So that's basically, part of the pitch for Datomic. So the thing I don't like about Datomic is that it's a proprietary database. So that's personally, I don't, having a database that's not like super mainstream, be proprietary is kind of problematic because, well, for obvious reasons, right? Like, let's say it stops being maintained anymore. Like, what do you do?
Finding people who know it.
Right.
There's all sorts of issues around that. But I mean, with any of that stuff, it's finding people who know it. But when it's proprietary as well, it kind of makes the barrier to learning it and working with it higher.
And I mean, for some databases, that's okay, right?
Sure.
Because they're just so huge that like, okay, they'll be fine. No matter what happens, this database is going to continue to exist. I feel like, for instance, the two examples of that are probably like DB2 and Oracle, right?
Right.
Like you probably shouldn't be too worried about those things, going the way of the dodo.
Right. Plenty of people who know them, plenty of books on the subject, plenty of certifications for people who are getting started, et cetera. Yeah.
Right. So as a technologist, I'm not too scared of those two solutions, right? Because I know, like, forget about the technical merits. Just, from those like they'll still be around.
Mm-hmm.
There's just too many systems on them right now. For smaller databases, right? If you're a new entrant into a market, right, that's tricky, right? Like you need. I feel like you need to be open source nowadays to compete almost.
Yeah.
So Crux is basically a take on that. It's an open source database. Go on GitHub, you can check it out. It's written in Clojure for the most part. And it gives you the same type of time traversal, time dimension that Datomic gives you, but it also gives you actually 2 time dimensions, which it's kind of difficult to talk about without examples. So I recommend for people that are interested in these type of concepts to make it more concrete, because I don't want to just talk about it and then, maybe it won't make sense. go to Wikipedia and look up a temporal database, right? And I'll post a link.
Great.
And that will kind of then they have an example, right, of what a temporal database should be able to capture, right? And you can kind of compare that here.
Yeah.
I'll put this in the.
I'll grab it and throw it up on here. You were doing just the Wikipedia temporal databases?
I'll send it to you. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
And that kind of gives you the use case, and then just go to the example. I'll read it real quick.
Sure.
Just so people have an idea. So here's a fictional person named John Doe, and here's a little bit about him, right? Like his biography. John Doe was born on April 3rd, 1975, in the Kids Hospital of Madison County, as son of Jack Doe and Jane Doe, who lived in Smallville. Jack Doe proudly registered the birth of his firstborn on April 4th, 1975, at the Smallville City Hall. John grew up as a joyful boy, turned out to be a brilliant student, and graduated with honors in 1993. After graduation, he went on to live on his own in Big Town. Although he moved out on August 26, 1994, he forgot to register to change the address officially. It was only at the turn of the seasons that his mother reminded him that he had to register, which he did a few days later on December 27, 1994. Although John had a promising future, his story ends tragically. John Doe was accidentally hit by a truck on April 1st, 2001. The coroner reported his date of death on the very same day, right? So this little fictional story, right, is a pretty typical of real life use cases, right? Like where there's a difference between when something happened and when something got recorded, and potentially there could be mistakes made and something needs to be corrected, right? So like imagine if you had a SQL database that's like a conventional schema where you're just updating stuff in place.
Yep.
Right? How much of this richness and auditing history you would lose.
Right.
Right. And I feel like typically when we work with update and place databases, right, most of this type of stuff gets lost, right? Like, oh, he was born on April 3rd, but it was only recorded on April 4th, right?
Stuff because you have to write basically some sort of log mechanism for it, some sort of history. And usually doing that right is difficult to do for every entity you have. So does it make really much sense to do that in a relational database without going crazy?
Right, exactly. And then there's cases like, oh, well, he forgot to register, right? Like, and that happened way later, right? Like, okay, well, August 26th, right? Or, I'm sorry, December 27th is when he registered, but August 26th is when it actually happened.
Right.
And then April 1st, right, he dies, and then he gets recorded the same day. But what if he got recorded a different day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if there was a mistake and then you have to go correct it, right? So maybe the coroner screwed up the months or something like that. That happens. That's real life. And I feel like in most of the information systems that we as consultants deal with, like this happens.
Yeah.
Right. Like real life is messy, and unfortunately, you can't just say, okay, well, born April 3rd, died April 1st, everything's okay, and moved on April 20th or August 26th, right?
Yeah.
Real life is messy. So I feel like these type of motivating examples really show the type of stuff that wouldn't it be nice if your database handled this type of problems out of the box. So a lot of times, right, like a more boring scenario is, let's say you're migrating systems and you're importing, like, so in the original system, right, something got recorded with a date, but then you're importing into a new system, right? Like, wouldn't you want to know when you imported this stuff? Like, I understand that from a business standpoint, right, something happened, on X date, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'd also want to know when it was imported into the new system too, and you'd want to be able to query on that. So Crux supports those type of use cases pretty much out of the box. Like, again, it's still got work to do. It's still an open source database, right? There's bugs, etc. But
sure.
I feel like, in my opinion, it has a lot of promise.
Very cool. Okay.
And I think stuff like this will be the killer app in the future.
All right, let me drop a link into your into the thing here for your baby JVM talk for a
Hmm.
second too, so people can find that. I have it right here.
So I should say that I'm not the only person at Chariot who's looking into it. There's other people. There's at
Into
least
Crux,
one that I
yeah.
know of who's also doing stuff with it. So
Let me put that also in here. So here's Crux for people who are interested. You could take a look at the comments on our feed here. And so you'll see the Crux GitHub project. And also if you click on a link at the top of that, somewhere in here, there it is. That's the main kind of site to, kind of outline what it is, Open Crux. I'll throw that in there as well.
yeah,
But
they have
yeah.
like tutorials too. Like they have like little
Mm-hmm.
detective stories, like sort of like, the John Paper or the John Doe fictional character that I read about in Wikipedia. They have something like that too, where you can play with Crux and kind of get results.
So just out of curiosity, and I won't spend much more time on Crux, but you can do web service calls to it, I guess, or
Yeah,
use an API, so you don't have to just write Clojure code against it
yeah,
in case you have to work with something else. Okay,
yeah.
cool. All
Um,
right.
so the other thing is like this will probably, to bring it back to learning stuff, right? Like it's
Tied
probably
together.
going to be a one of our internal conference talks, either for me or maybe for a few other people, and
That's
it
great.
kind of motivates you to sort of flesh out the use cases and try to get something working so you can have a demo and show people. It's great fun.
Mm-hmm.
And at some
Absolutely.
point, once we feel like this is the way to go, maybe it will become a solution to a problem that we have.
And for you developers out there that are just getting started, maybe, or just going down your journey and want to kind of sharpen your tools as you're going along, there's nothing better than working up something to explain to other people. So whether it's writing a blog article, doing some sort of video on it, if you like to do Twitch, for example, and you're really good at kind of tap dancing on your feet, you could do that. Even just the process of getting to the point where you can do that is a huge leg up for you in terms of the way your skills will improve. And we've all been doing that for years here at Chariot. We just think it's so important. And it's one of the single best things you can do, I think, to improve your skills is to really have to explain things to others.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. It's
Cool.
it's fantastic.
It really is.
I mean, I wish there was a better way of doing it, but there isn't. So this is it.
The only way around is through it. That's the way I look
Yeah,
at it. Like you've got to plow through, and then when you've plowed through something and you've gone through the pain, the positives, everything else, you can come out the other side and tell someone else what your experiences were, and then you end up knowing a lot more about it than you did when you started. So, very important skill to hone over time. And you're never perfect at it. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna take left and right turns. It's important to take those left and right turns and learn things that become dead ends, because you can then say, you know what, I know enough about this that it's not going to work for me or work for my business, or that it's just not the right technology for the job. But just getting in there and looking at other things will sharpen your skills.
yeah, that's the thing. I'd like to add to that. Like once you went through that, a lot of times, and I know Ken, you know this.
Mm,
Like when you're, I mean, I don't want to say good, but like you're pretty good, right? Like I'm pretty good at some stuff, right? I don't want to say I'm like, oh, I'm really good at this, but like I know a little bit about some stuff. And the problem is when you get to that level, you see how much, like the internet is a great place, but there's a lot of junk on the internet too.
yeah, that's
And like
true.
you'll be able to much quicker filter out the junk on the internet, because I know,
Hmm.
you and I do that all the time. Right?
Yeah.
Like somebody's giving some sort of advice, and you're like, no, that's not good advice.
It
Don't do
doesn't
this.
pass the sniff test. Right.
Like
Exactly.
I've
Like,
done this before. This is not good advice, right? Like this
right.
is not how you're supposed to do something like that.
Right.
And I don't want to call it out, but like you see a lot of times when you don't have your own experience and you just like Google stuff, and you see something like on Stack Overflow or somewhere else or in somebody's blog, and you think they're authoritative, and then you're like,
And sometimes it takes a little bit of experimenting with that to see. Sometimes it takes digging into
yeah,
the source code a little bit more, or, really thinking through the approach. And then other times it's very obvious, like it's a paragraph and you're like, yeah, thanks, no,
yeah.
or it's a piece
You
of
see
code
a
that
lot
was
of
committed
bad
to
advice.
once. Yeah, right, right.
And it really helps filter that out when you're like, okay, well, this isn't right. Like I know this
Situational
because
awareness.
I know this because I've spent weeks playing with this, and I know it's not like this, right?
True.
Or some people will omit stuff, right?
Hmm.
They're like, oh, this works great. And I'm like, yeah, it does. What about this though?
Right. What about you
That
do a
other
certain size and
thing,
it falls over? Yeah, right,
yeah,
exactly.
that other thing makes this advantage, moot.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Well, Dan, listen, it's been fantastic talking to you for the hour. I really appreciate it. We don't get a chance to talk enough. So
I know.
it was a good one.
Hopefully I'll see you in person sometime soon.
I know. Tell me about it. All right, Dan. Thanks so much. That's
Yep.
Dan Boykis, everybody.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
All right. And that covers our Tech Chat Tuesday for this week. So I'm Ken Rimple, and thank you very much. And we'll see you next week.